to the okay. So this is the release team meeting for going over the product development workflow process and discuss how we want to use and apply the workflow labels. Yeah, so just make sure, I think we are all updated on the latest changes to the workflow, the handbook page. Yeah, and I added here some agenda points or some goals for this call. It's like what Audrey was saying, to make sure that we are all on the same page of how we want to use this workflow and the workflow labels, align process expectations, and discuss a little bit how we've been using it and how we want to actually implement the guidelines. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm just going over the agenda docs. I'm not going to read what the workflow is about, but I can start with my point that I just brought up a few concerns about how we are using the current workflow labels in Slack. I had a discussion with Jason, and I think it's also related to what Audie added here, that we're adding currently the workflow labels to development issues. So I guess that's the first point that I have in the agenda for us to realign on how we want to proceed with the creating validation and solution issues instead of reusing the ones that we have right now. Yeah, so yeah, I think Audity had a point about that. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, so I just repeated what Jason posted on our channel, on the S-Release channel, that it's important to understand that these workflows, they should be dedicated to product management and UX designers. They should be the ones using these labels before an issue it even starts development, like even discussing. It's basically around validating what we want to do. It's basically before we even have some kind of proposal. So it's kind of understanding the realm that we're living in and kind of both understanding the problem and then understanding the solution. So that's the validation track. It shouldn't be used if something is just unclear or is missing UX, which I've seen being used at the moment. So I just want to clarify this point. That validation is a whole separate track. It involves reading on competition and what's going on in the market and discussing with customers or people who are using competitors and are not using GitLab, and we want to get them on board. So it's really a totally different track than anything we want to do from the development track. And maybe one of the outcomes of this validation would be a new issue that would go into development, but not this specific issue. So I think that's like the basis, and it's really important to understand that.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that that I had a similar chat with Dimitri today, and we were sort of talking about some of the same things and how this works, and some of the same challenges and everything. There's kind of two workflows for things at the company now. There's this validation flow where we're all sort of trying this for the first time, and we've identified one or two issues, and the whole company is like, each stage or group is doing one or two items, and they're the first ones to ever move through this process. And all of the workflow labels in the validation track are associated with only the items that are going through that flow. So there's which is not to say that like any random item that we do or any of the things that are in 12.5 already that didn't go through this flow need somebody to think about UX and need somebody to think about problem validation to a certain extent and need somebody to think about solution validation to a certain extent. That's all super true, but they're not going through this process where we like make the mural board and we do the RICE score and we present them to Scott. And so mixing the labels and having like dev items that need a conversation about solutions but are not going through the process and applying that label causes like a lot of confusion when it comes to looking at the validation flow and how things are going. Because if you look at the documentation, there's a list of like 8 bullet points of things that you need to do if you're working on an item that is for solution validation. And a lot of them build on dependencies that you had and things that you did in previous steps of the workflow, where if you just add that label to a random item or an implementation item, none of those things happen. So how do you refer back to the opportunity canvas if you never made one? So I think that there's kind of a separate question of how do we have UX planning conversations on items that aren't going through the product development workflow. In the past, we've sort of used the UX label for this. Like you apply the UX label and it means that you need to have some conversations and then it gets the UX ready label. But that also sort of just means like that a mock-up is needed. So it's not really saying the same thing in an expressive way. So I think it's probable that we need to come up with something a little bit better for how we make sure that items that aren't going through the validation track are complete enough to be worked on, and engineering, UX, PM, everybody sort of agrees on that, and things aren't just flowing into that that don't make any sense. But that solution is not to apply the labels from the product development workflow to them, because that just blurs the lines and makes it so that neither one of them is working effectively. Does that make sense?
So I will, I'll jump in and apologize for triggering this meeting for everyone, because I was the one that went and put that label on everything. So sorry everyone. This is like kind of a case of me not really knowing what was happening downstream with that label, and just really looking for a way to indicate that like this is an issue that we need to clarify before we can start development on it. And so I wanted to like put it in a bucket somewhere that said this isn't ready to be worked on yet because it needs some questions answered. But obviously there is some dependencies of that label that I wasn't aware of. So now I am, and I will definitely stay away from it in the future.
Well, what I'll say in your defense, Darby, and everybody's defense is that until just like last week, this process was less defined. There was like the release labels, then Verify had their own slightly different versions of the labels, and like everybody was following a slightly different process that all worked a little bit differently. And I know Karina had said like we were doing it in one way, and Reed had said we were doing another. I had said we're doing it another. There was no. It's totally understandable that you or anyone else would have a vision for how these labels work that was different. But now we do have the single doc that describes it, and so as best we can align to that, then that's the best that we can do. If we find it's not working, we can make changes to that document and then make it official and consistent. So don't be too hard on yourself, Darby.
Well, just wanted to take the blame on that one. But to your point, I think, yeah, like exactly what we need to do is figure out what is the way that we indicate that this still needs like some pre-work. And I saw there is a label for like breakdown or something like that, which could be useful. Although I'm not sure if that like alerts the stakeholders in the proper way, but maybe it does, or maybe we can make it do that. But you know, if we want to say, what is it, planning breakdown, like maybe planning breakdown is the way to do it.
I would avoid all of the workflow labels.
Okay.
I would recommend either using the UX label like we used to use it, but if we're trying to get away from that, which is probably the right thing to do, but I don't know what the plan is on the team, then I would suggest that we make a label called like conversation needed, that anyone can apply, and it just means that a conversation needs to happen, and it's a signal that we shouldn't move it into deliverable as long as that label's on there. Something simple like that is what I would recommend, and avoid the workflow labels.
So if I may, I think there's actually several different things that we're trying to tackle, and I think it's important to voice them and then see if we've kind of find a new solution. One of them is the UX is missing, and I think the UX label kind of serves its purpose in that matter, because we do have a process for once we address it to mark UX ready, and then actually move it to the workflow ready for development. And I think that's a good process because we actually have people labeling, unlabeling, and moving it on to the next swim lane. So I think that's good. I think Darby has a challenge because some of the development issues, they require research. And as development, this happens rather often in development where you stumble onto this big, huge hole that you didn't anticipate. And then that has to be marked somehow that, you know, it's stuck or it's pending another solution, and they may be experimenting also. So maybe experiment would be a good label, or research could be a good label. And then another thing that I've been seeing is that sometimes using what you said, Darby, which is the breakdown. sometimes an issue, you start with it, you think it's okay, turns out to be bigger than what we anticipated. Then you start breaking it down into different issues. Now these little issues, I don't know like what's going on with those labels. Also a deeper conversation, not only regarding solution validation, but some people like copy all the original labels from the parent, some don't. So then it's all confusing about, is it done, is it not done? Some of it is done, some of it is going on to different milestones. Do we actually have a DoD? Do we have something that, that is ready to be shipped off? So we also need some kind of process to deal with all the child issues that are born from the parent issue, which I don't think any of the workflows at the moment have a good solution.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's nothing out there for that.
And that's just off the top of my head, things that I saw now, but there must be additional problems maybe John and Darby can share that we need to address.
Workflow blocked is a good one that I have. That label is in the build track, so it doesn't cause confusion. And if there's like a big open question, sometimes workflow blocked can highlight that that something is blocked on a decision. I don't think it covers all the cases that we're talking about, but maybe it helps with some.
I think I added this a little late to the agenda, but one piece of feedback that I've heard is that it's easy for the sorry for the noise. It's easy for the workflow to kind of get out of sync a little bit, and I've heard some of that with like let's say that an issue has backend and front end. Maybe backend is in review, but front end is still in dev. So that was a question that came up, is like what's the preferred approach when something like that happens? But that's just one piece of feedback I've heard so far.
So I have seen in my previous company, this usually wasn't a front end back end issue, it was more dev and QA, where a new label would be created to indicate that it still needs to follow suit, front end in dev, back end in dev. But we definitely shouldn't complete an item and split it up to back end and front end, because there's no point in delivering half an item. So maybe just add another workflow label.
Yeah, I was going to say the issue that customers are looking at, like we can break them down into front end, back end, internal items. That's no problem. But the customer issue that's about delivering the value should sort of just be whatever the least furthest progressed one is, so that if front end is done, but back end is incomplete or vice versa, the status shouldn't be done. It should be whatever the least furthest one is, so that like real customer status when they're going to get it is accurate.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
That's how I've been kind of communicating that to the engineers too, because they'll say the back end is in review, but the front, so we'll keep it at the farthest.
It's kind of annoying. I could understand that if you're both working on one issue and you both have a status that you need to reflect in there, it's annoying.
Yeah.
And instead of the workflow labels, I think we have discussed this in the past, but we never really did, like creating separate issues for front-end, back-end, and UX, for example. And especially that in the UX group, we have the discussion about killing the UX ready label, not that we have the workflow labels, for example, in design or ready for development. I'm not sure how that's would impact, having or not having a workflow for front end or back end ready, things like that. Because I completely agree, we need to put the sign there somehow that it's not just needs UX or UX ready, but UX is also blocked because we need, user input or this or that. So I wonder if creating more labels would help, or if we should have dedicated issues per, DRI.
So first of all, I would hold off on killing anything before something works.
It's a discussion. It's a merge request. I'll find out.
And second of all, I'm kind of scared of breaking things down into a million issues because it's harder to keep track of. And at the end of the day, the customer sees one issue as a whole. So maybe instead of breaking down into issues, breaking down into merge requests would be a better way to go.
Yeah, in other products, there's like subtasks as a separate kind of entity that lets you do this in a more clear way, where you're not confusing issues with things you're delivering, and also epics are sometimes not like a different kind of entity. So yeah, maybe this is a product suggestion that could help us, that we have these individual issues that you know, correlate with an individual deliverable to a customer, and there's no clear way for different people to contribute to that issue without it just becoming like a blob of everybody's contributions, or making more issues that look the same as the original issue and generate confusion in a different way.
So one of the things we've done on some of these larger projects is or issues, I guess, is to create like a checklist. I mean, there's no way to like really enforce this in the application, but basically in the description, you create a checklist of like front end, back end, you know, whatever other things. And so like, maybe this is about like, I'm kind of thinking about, maybe I'm conflating two things, but maybe we have like a implementation plan or something like that as a step in all of this, and creating the implementation plan involves adding a checklist to the issue with the various steps involved. And so then, you know, there's front end, there's back end, there's UX, whatever that needs to be done. And then maybe we tie that into the labeling too. So if implementation plan needed, implementation plan completed, or something like that.
That's a nice idea. I know I've seen issues that have that little implementation plan like that. And that is always nice. The other thing that we can do to help this from the other direction is just make sure things are small, and even within a single release, like if we can break it down into individual deliverable parts, then we can help avoiding having too much collaboration required.
Yeah.
Coordination.
Another suggestion that I have is that this is something that we used in my previous company, was that there's feature owner, and each issue has one DRI, even if there's multiple people assigned from it to it, UX, back end, front end. One person gets the ownership of the feature, and they need to make sure that everything's tied together. So that could be an idea.
Yeah.
Who are those typically in your experience then? Are they engineers?
Yes.
I think this also will be super valuable for UX, because now we talk about, we still talk about smaller like improvements within a feature, but if we talk like, I don't know, feature flags or, you know, releases page, etc., then it makes sense that there is an owner, and then we talk about the overall vision for the functionality and not just what we are delivering this milestone or next milestone, so that we make sure of the, you know, keep track of overall improvements.
Yeah, so we have like 10 minutes left for the discussion, and I think we should get to some decisions about how we want to work going forward. So we discussed a bunch of issues. John, Darby, moving it to you because you have the biggest pain point here. How do you want to address this going forward with the labels and everything we discussed?
One big takeaway I have so far is in build phase 2, develop and test. Step 1 is engineering teams move into workflow ready for development as they commit. That's a big takeaway for me. And so as Darby and I are grooming and prepping to commit for just 12.5, just using that as an example, adding that workflow label is not going to be at the top of my mind as I commit the team to issues. Just wanted to share that as a takeaway so far.
It's only relevant though for the items that are going through this flow. So there should maybe only be
that's
like
fair.
One. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now.
Fair, cool.
And do we have any items in 12.5 that we need to look into to create solution and problem validation issues for 12.6 or even for 12.5? Because the things we have now, some of them are, I think most of like what we're saying, development issues that need some sort of validation, but we also have issues that need research. So we want to do this in 12.5 or plan for 12.6.
So if we have enough time, let's bring up the board and just go one by one and make decisions.
Go for it.
Let me play the board. too many tabs. I always have this problem, but just a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to review whatever's in the validation issues columns. So there's 3 of them. One is manage vault secrets using GitLab UI. And this is my mistake, so I'm going to delabel validation backlog and create a new issue, but this is research on the
All we can see is the review product development workflow process doc. I think you have to share the right screen or tab or something.
Yeah, I am so bad at Zoom, so just one second.
It's okay. No, it does not make it easy. Trust me.
Okay, is this better?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So under validation backlog, this is actually a validation issue that I want to validate, which is managing vault secrets, but this is not the right item because it's a development item, so I will create a new one for the research itself.
And is that a problem validation that you need on that, Ori?
Yes.
Okay. And that's for 12.6 we're talking about?
We can negotiate that once we discuss the capacity, because there's several, like I'm trying to get a big picture of what here is actually UX and what is not, because there's a kind of a mishmash. So let's just place them in the right place and then take care of the milestones. So maybe just create the canvas for 12.5. Research review apps, we actually discussed this, Lori, on a different thread, so I don't want to deep dive. This is in the right position. It's not a dev item. Now we have solution validation, and Hayan, you see I brought it down from 15. So now it's 11. And let's see. So the first item, I actually pinged you, Darby, on it. I think it's just mislabeled.
Yeah, I think, well, that one, I'm not totally clear if we have the, like if we know what we're doing there yet. Because
so that's fair,
yeah.
But there is a proposal in the item, so it's definitely not a solution validation label. It should go to build and test, or what we were discussing before, like research or breakdown or whatever you feel comfortable using.
Okay.
Or experiment, what we discussed. Okay. Next, we have the Hayana's favorite issue for 12.5, which is validate what we were trying to accomplish in 12.4 research. I forgot what JTBD means, but I remember you explaining it very well, Hayana.
A job to be done.
Yep. Okay. Truly dynamic environment URLs. Darby, I think this is, again, something that shouldn't be marked as solution validation.
Okay. I'm gonna have to look through these and figure out. I don't remember off the top of my head what put them in that bucket to begin with. So let's see, this one, I'm looking at it. I think this one. I think maybe this one. I wanted to do some more research because I think the proposal for this was added by a community contributor without much context. So I don't know if the proposal is realistic or not. So I'd like to look into that a little bit more.
Can I jump in with a question here? I'm sorry if I'm deviating a little bit. When we are putting the UX label, like when an item needs a research, I'm curious, like does a product designer triggers the research, or that's Lori who comes in and like starts the research activity? So how is that happening?
Whoever has time, I think, but Hayana, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it really depends on the scope. So some of the issues that, if we need to look into the whole problem behind and do the actual research, I think like what Odit said, we see capacity and talk with Lori. And if it's a priority for Lori, then it's her problem. But if not, it's our problem to and then Laurie will help us out. Yeah, we've done both things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, mainly my role is to work in the problem validation space. Unfortunately, I am one person, but I work with 10 other people outside of this group. So I don't get to be dedicated just to y'all. So I have to balance all of those things. So that's why I'm staying in the problem space.
Mhm.
So for the solution validation piece, if I have nothing else to do, I'm happy to help. But most often it falls in the laps of the designers to validate the things that really need to go in front of customers, and then I'll help them with that process.
I see. The reason for me for asking that is I'm was thinking, is this any help of like splitting the UX label into the UX, meaning the product design and the research? I know that those are kind of like still one thing, but it seems that some of the tasks are needed just like the validation part and not the actual, the prototype or the workflow. But that's just an idea. This was kind of like where the question is coming from.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Nadia. I've been thinking, why don't we have both too?
Yeah.
But I've just been trying to focus on the problem validation label because that's what I'm supposed to be focusing on. And I don't even look at the UX label because everybody's using UX interchangeably with design. In my background, you don't do that. UX is both research and design. It's not just that. So yeah, but whatever. I'm easy. I can just look at the problem validation label.
And also, Nadia, some of the issues that, although need research only or mostly, we still need to, for example, support with some prototyping, or at least look into it and review together the user tasks, etc. So it's never, I don't think we'll ever be like only research. We're always involved there at some level.
Sure, no, makes sense.
That is true.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we have 1 minute left, and I don't think it's feasible to go through the entire list. But it looks like the majority of the items are dead items. And Hayana, what I suggest is that we asynchronously review what actually needs UX research, because the majority of them is basically just needing some kind of prototype. I do think there's 2 items here that says something more obvious. So there's 2 items. One is for Docker files, and the other one is for just review apps in general. Those might require UX research to actually figure out what we want to do in order to make them more obvious. But I think the rest of the items are basically mockups and behavior definitions. So I think they should all pretty much go out of the solution validation one.
Yeah, and I think it would be great if we could look into those issues that need some sort of validation, that we could make them kind of either create something new or a new issue, or make them fit into the validation backlog template, so that we have, the right criteria for it.
So I suggest to create something new for all of them, because these items have some history, and I think it would be a shame to lose that. So definitely, I think all these items should be pushed out from the solution validation, and we should create new items for at least those 2 more obvious ones, and the rest should just follow the regular development workflow unless there's any objections.
No objections.
That's great. So let's everyone take their action items in clearing up these labels, and I will create new issues for those 2 that we discussed. Darby and John, if you could review the development ones and just clear the label, because I don't want to mess up whatever you guys were thinking, but it's important for me that it be labeled correctly. And I do feel like we're missing just the final decisions on how we want to work moving forward. And that's okay, because this was more of a, what should we be doing? I think we should follow up in the release managers weekly next week and like make some decisions.
Yeah, agreed. This was super helpful though. So thank you, everybody.
For sure. Yeah. Good meeting.
Great. So have a nice day, afternoon, evening, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.